Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Chai and Cocktails, produced by Avaaz Media. Avaaz Media is producer of global stories based on sci-fi, fantasy, and mythology. We produce content by and for underrepresented storytellers. Our content includes RPGs, podcasts, web series, shows. We want to provide a platform that connects and showcases work for Brown Geeks. So, if you would like to find out about our launch that will connect various Brown creative professionals and also just have a safe, inclusive space to geek out over everything from mythical creatures to multiverses to Baby Yoda, then go to our site, thebrowngeeks.com. And whether you're a creator or a fan, we'd love to have your feedback because this is supposed to be a platform for you. So, thanks again for joining us. And we're going to discuss how to get cultural representation right because there are so many wrong ways, as we know. So, today's event is moderated by our Brianna de Silva, our art director and a fantasy content creator here at Avaaz Media. She's also a fantasy author, director, and the creator, former host of Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of female authors of sci-fi and fantasy. So, Brianna, take it away.
All right. And I am pleased to introduce our two panelists, Kate Heceta and Xiran J. Zhao. Kate is a blogger and YouTuber living and working in the Philippines. She champions diversity, meaningful representation, and giving a damn. Her blog, YouTube, and Instagram are her little safe spaces on the internet to recommend diverse reads, discuss representation and advocacy, and promote Filipino authors and books. Xiran is a first-generation immigrant to Canada from small-town China, which for China means a town of 4 million people. They are a recent graduate from Vancouver's Simon Fraser University and a sci-fi and fantasy author. Their debut novel from Iron Widow comes out in fall 2021 from Penguin Teen Canada. They also post YouTube videos about Chinese history and culture, and their very first video, Everything Culturally Wrong with Mulan, has nearly 2 million views. A warm welcome to both of you.
Hi.
Hi.
Before we dive into our discussion, I want to thank Summers for sponsoring tonight's Chai and Cocktails. Why choose between a chai or cocktail when you can have both? Panelists, what are you guys sipping on?
I have got coffee because it's 9 a.m. here where I am, so I can't exactly drink. Or I could, but it's not advisable.
Probably not.
And I have water and then a green smoothie.
Smoothies are the best. I actually had a smoothie myself for breakfast this morning. I'm sipping on the Summers chai mixed with like some espresso and stuff too. I don't think I did it correctly, but it's yummy. So this panel is inspired by the controversies that came up both around the latest Mulan movie and the teaser trailer that came out for Raya and the Last Dragon, an upcoming Disney animated film set in Southeast Asia-inspired fantasy setting. Before we get into specifics, I'd love to know just some of your broad general reactions to both or either of these films. The big topic.
Well, the Raya film in particular, I try not to make it a habit to like pass judgment on movies or books that I haven't seen or read yet. But I guess what really bothered me about the trailer was the genericness of it all. I mean, when they said that it was Southeast Asian inspired, I mean, the countries of Southeast Asia are vastly different. You can easily tell that although you might not be able to identify if something is specifically Filipino or Thai or Vietnamese, you could look at the examples of culture from those three places and they wouldn't look alike. So it really was bothersome that like it was all mashed together like that. And someone pointed out on Twitter, and it was a really good point for me, that there would be like a huge uproar if someone, or if there was some form of media that did that with like Chinese, Japanese, or Korean culture. Like if you put all East Asian cultures together into one movie and said that it was East Asian inspired. So it kind of is like what the vibe was not good, that they felt that it was okay to do that to Southeast Asian culture. So I understand that there are people who are excited for it, being that it is a Southeast Asian inspired movie. And I don't remember the actress's name, but Rose Tico from Star Wars is going to be in there. So she's a Vietnamese actress. So I understand being excited for that, but also like looking at it from that angle, it's not the best that it could have been. So that was my initial thought on Raya.
Right, and thanks, Ryan. I saw your comment. And for me, well, I made a 40-minute video on how like all my thoughts about Mulan,
Yeah,
but
can you summarize that in 1 minute?
yeah, ultimately, I think the issue was that it was insincere. Like the fact that they made a big issue about, well, they really like they bragged about how how authentic it was going to be and how it was a direct adaptation of the original ballad. And it feels really weird that they didn't do that for like any other like Disney live action film. Like even with Aladdin, they weren't like, oh, we've made this an authentic, well, I don't know, authentic I don't even know what culture Aladdin is. I think it's just like a giant mishmash. But they really didn't. And then even with stuff like, I guess, Beauty and the Beast, that's French, right? And they weren't like, oh, this is going to be an authentic French movie, you guys. But they did that with Mulan. And it would have been good if they actually like put in the effort to make it authentic. And that, as in like bringing in like a bunch of creators with Chinese heritage who grew up in the culture. But then they just like they picked a bunch of white people and then they like had the audacity to call it authentic. And it was just a mess all around. It showed that like I think the only reason they said that it was going to be like authentically Chinese was it was a cash grab at the Chinese box office. But then they didn't even put any sincerity into the cash grab. So like we see you, Disney. We see you. And then I did like while I'm not Southeast Asian, I think the issue with me and the Raya movie is that, you know, they have like 7 different shades of like European princesses, and they all come from distinct cultures. So why is it that when you like move to this Southeast Asian inspired princess, like you only have Raya for the entire region? And then I think I've said this on Twitter before, but the very fact that she represents the entire region means that there's probably not going to be a second Southeast Asian princess, because like she's going to compete with Raya for merchandise. And we all know, I think we do need to take the Disney business model into account. And the very fact, like they have their whole line of princesses, right? And having Raya represent the entire Southeast Asian region means that there's not going to be a second one from the region, because she will be competing with Raya on a merchandise level. And that I find is just very disappointing, because that didn't happen for the European princesses.
Yeah, like it's interesting because Disney, we all know Disney is such a like they're a big company, and they're very they're very conservative, and they want to like make as much money as they can. But the thing with Mulan is funny because it's so counterproductive. If you're trying to cash grab, but then you're not going to actually make something that people would like, then
yeah, and it pissed off people on like all different sides. So it was actually pretty impressive. Like they managed to do it in a way that everybody hated the movie.
Good job, Disney.
Well, not everybody, I guess. Some people liked it, and they are allowed to like it, but like criticism is necessary for Disney. They don't need to be coddled by us. They're Disney.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there was one scene in the Mulan movie, like literally one scene that I liked, and it's the scene where the witch stands up from the emperor's throne, and she's like in a gold dress, and like the sun's coming in from behind.
Oh yeah,
her.
Definitely.
That was literally the only frame in
like,
the entire
if she
movie
had become emperor, I would have loved the movie.
Like if she'd become emperor with like Mulan as her general or something.
Oh my god, ideal ending.
Oh man. So this, I feel like, leads pretty well into the next question, which is, what are some problems that can come up with writing another person's culture? Like as Xiran was saying, there were a lot of, it was white people that were writing the story for Mulan, for example. And so, for example, also you think about things like Western creators are telling the Mulan story with like Western ideas around, say, witchcraft or like feminine and masculine presentation. Like in the cartoon, or she cuts off her hair to look like a guy, which doesn't really make sense in ancient China. So from that perspective, like, why do you think that happens so much, and what can be done to avoid these kinds of problems?
Xiran,
Well,
do you wanna? Yeah, go.
okay, yeah. What I think is that if you're writing something that's based on a culture that's not your own and that you didn't grow up in, it's gonna fundamentally be a caricature of what that culture actually is, because like you didn't grow up with this, so you don't actually understand all the nuances that go into the culture, like especially in the West. um East Asian East Asian inspired media in the West has like such a heavy focus on honor. It's like that's like the primary motivation for so many characters. But like if you actually like go into it's really not that big of a deal. Like it is a big deal, but it's not like as big of a deal as like Western media make it out to be. And I think and then these Western Asian like media, they inspire each other. So they end up creating this like weird thing that's like separate from actual East Asian cultures. But then you know what I mean, right? Like
Yeah, they're like
yeah,
taking
they
on
fuel each other because like the stereotypes build upon each other, and it just ends up like not. It doesn't end up feeling like right to actual like people of actually of that culture at all. So I think um and I also think you have to like consider how much power does the creator have. I think that if you're a big media production company, you do have the power to hire like actual creators of that descent. And then if you choose to hire white people instead, that's a decision that you are consciously making to like exclude those creators. And then you're saying that, and then I feel like they have this attitude of like, oh well, but there are so few of those creators. Well, if you're gonna be making a profit off the aesthetics and then of someone else's culture, then you should go and like make an effort to find creators of that culture and lift them up instead of just going to like the same familiar white creators that you always go to.
You know, just to add to the whole honor thing that Xiran mentioned, funnily enough, like I know you said that Western media that has like East Asian aesthetic always focuses on the whole honor thing when it's not really that big of a deal. Funnily enough, there are cultures in Southeast Asia where honor, the concept of honor is really a big thing, but you're never gonna see that on in any form of media because it's not something that is very well known. And again, it's all down to the whole hiring creators from that descent thing. I mean, like here in the Philippines, we have this concept called utang na loob, and how do I translate that into English? Basically, it means something like you did something for me that was a really big deal, and I now owe you like intensely. So, and the debt is not gonna be wiped out until I do something of equivalent value for you. And then we also have a phrase that I think is taken from Spanish. I'm not sure, but it's called delicadeza, and it's basically like loss of face, which is a whole thing with honor. And also like I just find it really funny that there are actual concepts of um honor that exist in other cultures other than East Asian, but you're not gonna ever see it in media because these big creators don't do the work of hiring people from, like what Sharon said, they don't do the work of hiring people from these different cultures to actually put in the what they know, what they grew up with, their lived experiences and all of that. And also like I think there's a very big difference between creating a character who's just there and like um for example, like if you have a white author who's writing a book and then their characters, they have characters who are people of color, or if they're a cis writer and they have trans characters, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But like the story can't be about them being people of color or being trans because that's not an experience that you have that you're intimate with. And I mean, there's only so much a sensitivity reader can do. If you yourself cannot relate to something and then you're going to make your story inherently revolving and about that thing, it's going to be flawed. I mean, there's really no way to work around that. So like it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your characters be from a culture or an ethnicity that's not yours, or a gender that you are not, or a orientation that you're not. But if it's specifically about the experience of being that, then you're not really going to be able to tell that story authentically. And you also have to ask yourself, like, is this my seat to take at the table? If if you're in a position of privilege relative to that identity, am I taking a seat in the industry, whether that's a movie industry or the publishing industry or whatever, that could be occupied by someone of this ethnicity or this culture or this gender or orientation, who can tell this story better than I can and who probably should get the seat before I do? So that's a question that, should be asked before delving into these kinds of stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a big thing is that like like recently, like creators of color have been pushing hard to just get themselves opportunities to tell their own stories, but yet there's still like a subset of white creators who are like, well, are we just not allowed to tell like just not allowed to write characters of color anymore? That's not true, but again, like a big issue in the creative industries is that if one thing comes out, then other things are going to get rejected for being too similar to that thing. So there's a lot of eternal politics going on in the creative industries. And then the one thing, like, I'm not saying that white people necessarily can't write characters, protagonists of color well, but the thing is that imagine that if you got a book deal because you're imagine that if you're a white author who got a book deal with a protagonist of color, and then your book deal prevented an actual author of color from getting a book deal because the publisher already has like a book of that culture, because they totally reject based on that one thing. So you basically took this opportunity away from that author of color. And is that like a situation that you ever want to be in?
Yeah, it's the whole difference between telling a story about someone who's different from you and then telling someone else's story. And I've definitely heard examples of that kind of a thing happening where it's like, oh, we've already published one, Asian inspired fantasy this year. It's like,
exactly, like we
doing
all know
one.
publishers do that. They're still not at the level of like, because like especially like I see just like books that are inspired by the same culture, and they are like vastly different in plot and content and characters, and then yet they are like compared to each other just because they're based on the same culture. And then you would never do that for like a white book.
Right, because the things that differentiate it more and the story itself and things like that. I feel like we've kind of mostly answered the next question that I was going to ask you guys, but there are probably some more nuances here too. So it's about how much someone can write about a culture that isn't their own. Specifically, I guess we'll focus on the culture aspect because, as we've talked about before, you can always do better about researching, using cultural consultants, etc. But what would you say is that line where you're telling someone else's story, and there's also that kind of the aspect around like authenticity in diaspora, like if someone's biracial or things like that, where it's like, is there a slippery slope there to avoid, or can you very clearly draw a line between those two different situations, like between respectfully and accurately writing about something that isn't your own experience and then like, taking someone else's seat? What do you guys think about that?
I would like to touch a bit on the whole diaspora thing, since I'm not a diaspora person of color. That's something actually that I would hesitate to do. I have no idea what the Filipino diaspora experience is. Um, I would probably be able to write it in the extent that there would be like I hesitate to use the word superficial, but like superficial representation. So like if I had a Filipino diaspora character, then I would talk about things that a Filipino diaspora person would be able to relate to in terms of like the surface level of the culture. But when you, so like language, food, all of that, but like going deeper into the actual experience of being a diaspora person, I would not probably touch that. And even if like I know a lot of there's like this notion of, oh, you're Filipino, they're Filipino, it should still be like you should still be able to write that, but the experience is vastly different. Like I, for example, have never had issues about my identity as a Filipino. I grew up here. I very obviously look Filipino. I speak the language. There's no question about that. And that is, I don't know the experience of someone who grew up in the United States, for example, of a Filipino who grew up in the United States, who is white passing or who doesn't speak the language. So I don't know their disconnect with their culture. So like I wouldn't feel, I don't think that that is something that someone who has not had that experience can tackle appropriately. So when I think it comes down to like the experience, the deeper portions of experience, rather than just things like language, food, which people everywhere, no matter what your ethnicity or your culture is, can appreciate. But when it comes to like that, those deep nuances of your particular identity, that's something where you have to like tread a little more carefully. I hesitate to like blanketly say no, don't write that, but like for sure think about it like a lot, consult a lot of people, consult people who have lived that experience that you're writing about. It's very it's a quagmire that like maybe you might actually be better off avoiding. I don't know. So that's pretty much my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I also think if you're gonna be writing someone, just like someone who is a character who is like not from your culture that you grew up in, you have to ask, why do you want to write them so badly? And sometimes, especially as a protagonist, like why do you want to write them so badly? Because I get like people are offended all the time when I say that, if when I people I still like constantly get comments on my Mulan video about just because I mentioned that the majority of the production staff was white, and then I get angry comments all the time about that. They're like, why are you saying that we're not allowed to do it? And like, so I wish that the production staff just asked themselves, why do you want to write this story so badly?
I remember, I don't remember if that was 2018 or 2019, and I don't remember the name of the book or the name of the author, but there was a book that was published about a particular sect of Southeast Asian society that are trans women. And then the author was a trans woman, but she was white. So like people were saying that, yes, we get that you get the trans aspect of the identity of this book, but like there's nuances missing about the Southeast Asian aspect and all of that. And I remember that question also being asked, like, okay, we get that you want to write a book with trans protagonists. That's not a bad thing at all. But why did you feel the need to particularly make it about these South Asian trans women? Like, why did you feel the need to make your character or to write particularly about South Asian culture when there's a plethora of like trans experiences that you could have pulled from? Yes, Ryan commented something involving jalebi colored eyes, and then like when you look up jalebi on Google Images, it's like a dessert that's orange. So basically, this author said that her character's eyes are orange. So like, okay.
Yeah. No, and I think I don't think that these things are necessarily done with malicious intent. I mean, my first two books, I hope they never see the light of day, but I wrote it from just like I wrote it from I wrote protagonists who are not Chinese, but they're still people of color, and I did it with I thought I was doing a good thing. Like I wanted to like represent other. I wanted to represent like other cultures, but then I was too young back then to realize that I'm not really in a place to be telling these stories. And I also don't think that there is necessarily a solid line for any of these cases, because even among a cultural group, like no culture is a monolith and everyone's going to have different opinions. And then while you should take these opinions into account, you also have to realize that it's not possible to please everyone, every single person in a cultural group. And then some people are going to be like, well, this book is totally inauthentic because it's not my experience. But what they might not realize is that it actually is the experience of someone else in that culture. So there are so many like nuances like this, and so it's impossible to just put like a solid line between being respectful and being offensive. Like some people in a culture may not be offended by a certain portrayal, and then others might be, and you never know, and not everyone's gonna agree.
Do you think part of it has to do also with just kind of the climate of entertainment right now and the fact that it isn't that inclusive? Like, could either of you imagine a future where we had enough, people are not publishing, say, one, as that example I gave, one Asian inspired fantasy book a year or something like that? Could you imagine a situation where that kind of a thing wouldn't be so big of a deal? Like, do you think the fact that there are a lot of opportunities that are closed off to people is a significant part of those dynamics?
For sure. I mean, I'm sitting on 2 book deals right now. The second is unannounced, but so far all of my gatekeepers, like my agents, editors, have all been white. And it's just a really surreal experience because like I was like my copy editor, because I have like quotes from classic Chinese texts. They're like 2,000 years old that I translated myself in my book. And then my copy editor just like got to those and she gave up. She was like, I can't find a translation of this. Sorry, I'm just gonna like, I will only edit this for content, for like typos and stuff. So, and it feels really surreal to me that I could straight up like start swearing in my book and then call it, oh, this actually means peace among worlds, and then none of my gatekeepers would know.
On the flip side of that, a friend of mine who has a book out, it was published last year. She had this really hilarious story about there's a scene in her book where the characters are taking, it's a contemporary, and there's a scene in her book where her characters are taking the train, and then the train breaks down in the middle of the tracks and people get down on the tracks and walk. Now this happens a lot here in Manila. Our train system is not the best. But like she had a very long discussion with her editor about how her editor was like, this doesn't sound like it's real, this doesn't happen.
Oh my
and
God.
then and then my friend was like, it does, it's happened to me. And the disconnect is just really funny. So like they spent a week talking about that, and like my friend had to prove to the editor that yes, this does happen. So like news articles and all of that. So I totally get what you mean about how you can actually start putting something in your book and like there's the knowledge is just not there, and you kind of have to talk about it first before it can pass on into the next phase of the publication. So definitely opportunity for not just, I mean, we talk a lot about putting diverse creators in the front of the production. So like in terms of movies, you have the actors. In terms of books, you have the authors. But like it matters just as much in the back end. So you've got to have space for in movies, crew, writers, directors that are people of color, and in the publishing industry, your editors, the agents as well. That's something that needs to be worked on.
Yeah, and I also don't think we can ignore the fact that to become a publishing gatekeeper, like you're an agent and editor, whatever, it's a very I think you have to inherently be privileged to be able to pursue those jobs, especially like as an agent. They make pennies for the first few years of their careers, and then so many people of color just don't have the privilege of being able to like risk everything and go into that. So that's why like agents are so overwhelmingly white, just because it's based on commission, and you have to have like a solid safety net to be able to pursue that career. And then also, like, speaking of a disconnect, I noticed that with my second book, there was like a distinct response and differences between readers of color and then white people. Because I wrote the protagonist's mom as a very like a stern Asian mother who like is really mean to you, but like secretly she cares. And then the white readers were all, oh my God, she's so mean. I don't understand why he would want to save her life after her soul is captured. And then meanwhile, all the readers of color were like, oh yeah, so relatable. Yeah, oh man, that's like my mom. So, and I find it like, and I do feel like probably at least like a few gatekeepers rejected me because they just couldn't relate to the story. Like these things, they were just like, oh, I don't understand why he would want to save the life of his mean mom. She's too mean to him.
So going to Raya again, what do you guys think about mashing cultures together if it's a fantasy setting, right? So, many fantasy stories do this in the interest of creating something new that's inspired by various real life cultures. But as we mentioned before, there's that, there's the whole aspect of like, okay, are you saying these are all the same? What do you think about when that's a fantasy setting, and what's kind of the line there where that's not okay?
Xiran, do you want to go first?
Okay, this, I think you really have to take things into context. I mean, I just finished recording a video about Avatar, and as we all know, Avatar mashes a bunch of stuff together. And what I've come to like, people have asked me all the time, hey, Shan, do you think that Avatar is authentic cultural representation? And then I've always like, this question has always stunned me because, I do love Avatar. It has a lot of familiar elements. It was very important to me. But would I say that as a Chinese person, it was authentic representation? I would say no, because it doesn't represent any real life cultures, actually. Like, the characters aren't Japanese, Chinese, or like Inuit. They are Fire Nation. They are Water Tribe, and ultimately, I think that Avatar itself is respectful. It pays homage to like all of these characters, and it handles them well. But I think it is the attitude of certain fans that make it disrespectful when they like praise Avatar as this like pinnacle of representation, and then they act like all Asians should be grateful to have this, and that it's like authentic and whatever. And so ultimately, I think it's like we do have to consider like the attitudes of the creators versus the attitudes of the fans. Like, the creators never said that they were like trying to be authentic. They're always very clear that it is like loosely inspired fantasy based on a whole bunch of Asian media they love. But then just like certain fans of Avatar, they try to like attach real life cultures to Avatar stuff. Like, I know there's a lot of discourse about like whether the Fire Nation is Japanese or what, but like that question shouldn't even be asked because it's very clear that the Fire Nation is not supposed to represent real life Japan.
That reminds me of a thought that I had when Raya came out. I think I saw it also on Twitter somewhere, but like, in regard to that, people never ask if Lord of the Rings, for example, is supposed to represent like England or
Oh yeah, that was my thought.
Scotland or whatever. Oh, that was your tweet?
That was my tweet.
Nice.
So I agree with Xiran about how you have to look at the creators intent. So like to go back to the Avatar example, the creators never really specifically stated that the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, the Water Tribes, whatever, were supposed to represent real life cultures. They were loosely inspired. The aesthetics and the art of bending, like the spiritual aspect of bending, the clothes, the buildings, they were loosely inspired by real life cultures, but they're not meant to be fantasy stand-ins for Japan or China or Thailand or Tibet or whatever. Um, so with the thing about Raya that is really weird to me is that they could have created it like as just a separate secondary world, like what Avatar did. The aesthetics would be inspired by the aesthetics from Southeast Asia, but to outright claim it as a Southeast Asian inspired movie, that's what's bothersome. Because now the creators are actually stating that like this is meant to be representative of, and then all those countries with like they mentioned like several Southeast Asian countries. So they mentioned Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, all of that. So that's what's off about it, because you're now saying that this movie is supposed to be representative of all these cultures. So like there was someone said there was this funny comment that I saw about how like there's a scene in the trailer where they show the different tribes, and there's like a group in white, a group in purple, a group in green, and then a group in yellow. And then someone was like, ah, yes, the four countries of Southeast Asia: purple, green, white, and yellow. So yeah, intent is stated intent is very important.
Yeah, and advertisement too. Like, are you setting up the expectation that this is going to be authentic when people go into the movie? Because that's what Mulan 2020 did. It set up the expectation that you were going to see an authentic adaptation of the ballad because that's what they were marketing themselves as. And then also, I think attitude matters. Like, do you have a different attitude when it comes to your European culture inspired stuff versus your other culture inspired stuff? Because I remember there's this one book series, and then it was set in the far future, and then all the European countries got to be themselves, but then Asia was just one big blob. So your attitude matters. This is why I'm mad at Disney. Like your European princesses are all individualized, and then you have like one for Southeast Asia. And then they didn't even do that for like East Asia because it's still possible to come out with a Korean princess or a Japanese princess because they specifically made Mulan Chinese. But then Southeast Asia is it's Raya, and that's it.
And with all these, now we're making all these impressions based off of the teaser trailer itself. Do you think there's any ways that these problems that we've identified here that they could be redeemed in the final film? Like if there's further information that could be revealed that could show that, you know, perhaps this does leave room, say, for future representation and things like that. If so, what would that look like?
Well, we all thought that Mulan 2020 was going to be good. It wasn't.
I really don't know. I mean, I'm not in the movie industry, or I don't even like critique movies. I mean, I watch them, that's it. But it would be difficult to sort of have that delineation already. I mean, when they've presented it as this movie that has this one aesthetic, there might be room for it to like say, oh, this particular tribe is inspired by this country, this particular tribe is inspired by that country. But I'm not optimistic.
There was oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think it's going to be a fun movie and plenty of kids are going to like it, but it's really a shame that, you know, that this is going to just define Southeast Asia for Disney forever because of like marketing issues.
Yeah, I remember someone was pointing out, I can't remember now because it's been a little while since I saw the teaser trailer, but there was like an animal in there too that was from East Asia. Do you know what I'm referring to?
I think it was the water dragon.
Oh, it was the dragon itself.
It might have been the water dragon. But like water dragons exist in certain like Southeast Asia countries too.
Yeah, we do have dragon imagery in Southeast Asia, but it's not like I mean, when you say dragon in mythology, the first thing that comes into your mind really is East Asian mythology. And from a marketing perspective, I get it because like it's the animal that's most easily identifiable. Like it's the most easily identifiable mythological animal. So I get that. But again, here we are with the concept of intent and having the importance of having creators who are from that culture as part of like the writing team, the directing teams, because there are a lot more mythological animals that really are more prevalent in Southeast Asian mythology. So like an example would be the tiger. I mean, that is also like a very well-known image in whatever culture, but also it's very culturally significant and important to Southeast Asian mythologies. Another is the crocodile, water buffalo. So like there's a whole ton of animals that could have been like the mystical animal of this movie. So there's that whole thing again about how I wish there had been like someone Southeast Asian on the writing team, on the directing team to point that out.
Yeah, like just because they're in those positions doesn't necessarily mean that they can like win the wrestle with the higher ups.
Yeah,
because like you can tell that like they went, oh, Asian, we definitely got to have a dragon in there. And that's like it's a very like East Asian centric view, and like East Asians are vastly overrepresented in just like West, like when people think Asia, people think East Asian and dragons and emperors and that kind of stuff. So I guess like that's probably why they went with a dragon for Raya. But like Southeast Asia has so many like cool mythical animals that are like more prevalent, like what you said. And it would have been, it feels like a missed opportunity for them to not represent those elements instead of just dragons. We're like dragons, we've seen so many of them. We don't need more dragons.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a strong marketing aspect to that as well, just because dragons are, so much more familiar to Western audiences as well. That like creates an immediate emotion, oh, a dragon, versus being introduced to something new. Yeah, it's interesting when you're bringing cultural elements to an audience that's new. It's like, and it's Disney, so they're just trying to see what will sell.
And when you're Disney and you have the potential to make such a big impact on the pop cultural consciousness, then I feel it's a really a shame if you like don't use that power to introduce like fresh concepts to people.
Yeah. Now let's go to a positive note. What are some examples of media that either you've read, watched, or otherwise enjoyed recently that had excellent representation? So representation that you enjoyed.
Ooh, wait, I have it here. Hang on.
Ooh.
I recently finished this. So this is Rivera by Jordan Ifueco. It was published this year. And it's very, the cultures in it are meant to, it's never specifically stated, but like you can tell that certain cultures in it are meant to represent specific places. And the author does it in a way that like you can tell it's not just a generic mishmash. Like you can tell that this particular, this culture is referring to this particular region, this particular practice or this particular culture. I don't want to talk more about it because I might spoil it, but I really enjoyed the cultural diversity that was present in this book. I think the author did a really good job.
Awesome.
Yeah. And for me, I really enjoyed Slay by Brittany Morris. And it actually goes deep into how like being Black isn't a monolith. And then, people may have like vastly different opinions. And then it goes like really deep into that kind of discourse. And I just, it was so good. I read it in one sitting. Like I opened it on a whim and then I just couldn't stop reading. So go check out Slay by Brittany Morris.
That's really high praise. Open it up and then didn't stop reading until you finished.
Yeah, that happened to me. Oh God, that was how good the book was.
All right, well, we can move into Q&A now. Let's see.
I actually feel like we sort of answered this one from Della Patterson. What do you think about movies like Big Hero 6, where the main character is half Japanese and white, but the story doesn't revolve around being half Japanese and it was mostly created by white people? I feel like we sort of answered that already about like intent and the experience being the point of the story. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I've never seen Big Hero 6, so I can't really speak on like what it did well and what it didn't. But I guess if it wasn't like actually involved, like if it didn't actually like revolve around his experience of being like half Japanese and half white, then well, again, I haven't seen the movie yet, so I can't say how good it was. Also, I'm not Japanese, so
yeah, I also could not speak for the representation, but I didn't really enjoy that movie. And from what I recall, it was very like, I think they even made up the city. It was like a combination of two cities.
Oh yeah, it was San Francisco.
Right.
Right. I've only ever seen it once, so like it came out in the theaters and I took my little brother to see it. So yeah, but I do remember that it wasn't even really about, it was never meant to be like representative of the experience of being Japanese and biracial. So like I don't think that would have been, I mean, it doesn't cover the whole thing that we talked about, disrespect and intent and all of that.
Yeah, and there's this really interesting question from Ryan. Given the near or slight monopolistic corporate culture that's growing in the entertainment world, how can a writer stay true to depicting their culture while making it clear that it's one part or one out of the many ways that culture can be represented? I think my opinion on this is that the onus should not be on creators of color to like state that over and over. It should be on white people to realize that you can't like look at this one thing and think it represents the whole thing. Like we don't do that with white books. We don't, and then it's kind of the equivalent of having like one Asian friend, and then you just believe that like everything he tells you is like representative of the entire region. And obviously, he's just like speaking from his own experiences, and the onus should be on other people to realize this instead of on creators of color to do the reminding.
Yeah. I was pretty much what Xiran said is more or less the same thing that I was thinking. But like, that's a question that you never get about white books, about books or movies that were written by or made by white people. Like, I know I mentioned this earlier, but like nobody ever asks if Lord of the Rings is meant to be representative of England, even though the author is British. Nobody ever asks um if the various planets on Star Wars are ever meant to be representative of a culture. So like, yeah, more or less.
That reminds me, there was one of the reactions to the Raya trailer where a bunch of people saying this is a ripoff of Avatar because they were seeing some similar like cultural elements. And I was like, wow. that's I feel like that's kind of a similar phenomenon too, where it's like people are bunching things into one category and not like, you know, yeah, seeing the full picture there and realizing that, yeah, there's more to what they're looking at.
Yeah, then this is also the thing with like Avatar. Avatar doesn't like Avatar is like as I've said, Avatar is respectful, but then so the onus it isn't really on Avatar to make it clear that it doesn't represent real life Asian cultures. It's like it's the fans who are at fault for like making that interpretation. And then you see stuff like people posing in Hanfu, and then people are like, "Oh my God, it's real life Zuko," and like, Avatar didn't invent Asian aesthetics, but it's also not Avatar's fault for like having to clarify that, hey, this is like we didn't invent this. It's on people to realize that, you know.
Yeah.
So like no amount of clarification is going to change the minds of those who are like intent on like doing stuff like that.
I just have to ignore them, I feel like, at that point, because they're not really contributing anything useful to the conversation.
Like, no one should have to remind you that no culture is a monolith and no one point of view can cover it all.
And the more that I think people like that do get exposed to I don't like that phrasing because that's very passive, but maybe I'll rephrase that. The more that they go out and learn about other cultures and have those experiences, then the less they're going to stereotype and put things into a box. But also people that are making those kind of comments, I think, are probably incurious and probably aren't going to do that. So, yeah. Let's see. I've got a couple more questions here from Ryan. Oh no, this is the same question, I think, but it's there is a term anime inspired for certain stories, and do you think that it can be misused or misapplied?
I'm not an anime fan, so I don't know what this word is.
I don't really know.
I'm not Japanese, so I don't really think I can speak to this, but I think that when it comes to Asian creations, the word anime is overused. And I say this as someone who like calls their own book anime inspired because it is like inspired by like several animes, but there's a tendency for like people to like see one thing done by an Asian creator and they're like, oh my God, that's so anime. So it's just overused.
And then a follow-up says, to that anime related question, do you think some of the aesthetics from anime, colored and abstract hairstyles as an example, could be used in an appropriate way? And do you use them in a non-appropriative? I was like, appropriative way, and you use them in a non-appropriative way, in a sincere way. Did I read that correctly? I think so.
Again, like none of us are Japanese. So I don't really think I can speak to this.
It's like,
yeah, I don't think we're the right people to say whether the coloring style or the abstract hairstyles that you see in anime and manga is significant culturally to the Japanese. So
yeah. But I think like yeah. But I also like I have to point out that like if someone from a culture tells you that, you know, this thing is meaningful, don't like use it willy-nilly. Listen to them. Don't be annoying.
Yeah.
But so far I don't think we've seen like, well, maybe I just haven't seen it, but there's not like huge discourse from the anime industry about like other people not using their aesthetics. I may be missing it though, so I don't know. We ultimately we can't speak to this because
Yeah.
we're not anime producers or Japanese.
I haven't seen anything about that either. Okay. Now we have a question from, I guess we'll just read these out. Casey Vanilla. Maybe you'll say the same thing about cultures not being a monolith, but how do you go about figuring out how to incorporate conversations of race and colorism in a novel? For example, if you're basing a book off of shared experiences of friends with their permission, but you're not of that race. Obviously recognizing that I can write these stories for them, knowing that they can't publish yet. It's an interesting question.
I think this is one of those things where intent is very important. So like if you're not of that race and you're talking about the experience of a friend in regard to race and colorism, first question, why do you want to write that story? I mean, if this is something that your friend experienced, and even if you do have their permission, and great job at including that, because that is also a problem that happens in publishing. You include your friends' experiences in your book without asking permission. Why is it important to you to write that story, for your name to be on that book that is about the experience of someone else? And I get it, because like even within communities of color, colorism is very much an important thing to talk about. But why is it that you want to be the one to tell this story? So that's like the first thing to ask yourself. And like I said earlier, if you're going to be the one to tell this story, are you taking a seat at the table that might be better told, if it might be better off if someone else was telling that story? So like um it's not a blanket, like I know I keep saying this, but it's not a blanket no, but really think about it for a bit. And then if you're really determined to be the one to write this story, then you have to do the necessary research, hire the necessary editors and sensitivity writers, and um to make a sort of example on that, one of my favorite books is Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. It's a book about a Filipino American kid coming to the Philippines because his cousin was murdered here in the drug war. So obviously, that is not an experience that Randy Ribay has lived. So honestly, when I first saw like the book coming out, I was really hesitant to like read it, even though Randy Ribay is a Filipino author, because I was thinking, oh, like this is gonna be American saviorism again. But then like people started saying that Randy Ribay came here to the Philippines, like he flew here, he spoke with local grassroots activist leaders, people who were involved in um, movements against the Duterte government and all of that, journalists who covered the drug war. So like I'm not saying necessarily maybe fly to the country where you're going to set your book, but like you have to be dedicated to the research if you're really determined to um, write about someone else's experience. And even before all of that research, like you really do have to think and ask yourself, is it proper, or am I really the best person to be writing this story?
All right, another one from Ryan. The question I have is a bit cross-cultural. If a BIPOC creator has a fascination or love for a certain culture, like Jollibees or Middle Eastern poetry, is there a way to avoid it being fetishistic or something true to character?
First of all, I really find it so funny that like poetry and then the aspect of Filipino culture that you're giving an example of is Jollibee. Like, okay, with Jollibee, it's a restaurant. I mean, I know we Filipinos like talk about it a lot, and it's basically like the thing that like, oh, you want to eat Filipino food, go to Jollibee. But it's not culturally significant to us. Like, it's literally a restaurant. So like, if you're talking about Jollibee, you're not gonna fetishize us. It's fine. But like, um, poetry, maybe that might be something else that you have to stop and think about for a while, because a lot of cultures, poetry is very culturally and significant and meaningful. So I'm not Middle Eastern, so I can't answer specifically to Middle Eastern poetry. But if you're asking specifically about Jollibee, it's a restaurant. We'll be fine if you include it in your book.
And there's a question, opinions on lumping Chinese rep together, because their culture really depends on location. A Malaysian Chinese would have starkly different experiences compared to a mainland China Chinese or American Chinese. And this is like absolutely accurate, but also but also it's really tragic because like honestly English doesn't have enough nuance to fully express like just how diverse like being Chinese is. It just lumps us all under just this huge umbrella of Chinese when in like when in like the Chinese languages, there are like a whole bunch of different words for it, and then it will be very clear like what you're talking about if you're like using these terms. But like in English, it's just all Chinese, so like it makes for a very cumbersome like discussion. And I also do feel like like again the onus is on the audience to realize that no one single person, Chinese person, can speak for them all, and that they are only giving their own opinions.
Yep. Okay, I think we've gotten through all the questions. Okay, we have reached the end of our time here. Kate and Xiran, where can people keep up with both of you?
Like I said earlier, so I'm a bookstagrammer, book blogger, booktuber. You can follow me at any of these places. My handle at all of them is your Tita Kate. So that's your as in you, your, and then Tita, Tita, and then my name, Kate. Just follow me anywhere on those. And before I turn it over to Xiran, I just wanted to add that currently the Philippines is experiencing a typhoon. Places here in the Philippines have not yet recovered from Typhoon Ulysses, which happened in November, and even they're now experiencing flooding from that particular typhoon, from the new typhoon that's coming in. So there are donation drives already being set up. You can find them on Twitter with the hashtag Typhoon Vicky or Vicky PH or Relief PH. Several of these donation drives have PayPal. So if you're not here in the Philippines, if you're international and you can spare some money to donate, I just want to also point out that like literally $1 is 50 pesos in the exchange rate. So like literally your $1 can feed a person for like the whole day. So if you can spare the amount, if you can spare any amount, any little bit helps. If you can't, retweeting also helps. So that's it.
And you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Xiran Zhao on all of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us during our Chai and Cocktails event. Be sure to follow us also, the Brown Geeks, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to keep up with all things Brown Geek.
Thank you guys for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.